The NUGEN MasterCheck is a meter designed to facilitate the production of high-quality audio in the paradigm of loudness normalization, with particular focus on the music industry and podcast community. The meter includes internationally recognized loudness measurements, dynamics monitoring, and ITU-compliant true peak intersample metering to provide a comprehensive set of tools that enable confident audio production, both in reference to existing material and in context of fully exploiting the available headroom in a loudness normalized environment. The NUGEN MasterCheck has 5 different primary applications, the first being audio production to a loudness target. Now, consumer audio consumption is increasingly being delivered through loudness normalized channels via iTunes Radio, Spotify, and all others incorporate loudness normalization, which is designed then to ensure that the user receives audio at a consistent level and doesn't have to constantly reach for the volume control from track to track. Now, this has repercussions, however. For the audio producer, your hot master will be effectively turned down automatically at playback. So in other words, there is no longer any advantage in being louder than the loudest level as determined by the playout system. Now, we're going to dive into the controls of this plugin a lot more in depth here in just a moment, but to play off of what I just said, using the offset to match button that's found on the MasterCheck will immediately show you how your audio is going to sound to the listener, allowing you to mix with this reality in mind. Likewise, mixing and mastering to play out loudness targets allows you to take full advantage of an increased headroom and increased dynamics that would otherwise be lost due to the loudness normalization process that we just spoke of a minute ago. The second of MasterCheck's 5 primary applications is measuring dynamic content. Now, MasterCheck introduces new standardized numerical measures of dynamic content or dynamic range within audio. The first being the peak to loudness ratio, or the PLR, and the peak to short-term loudness ratio, or the PSR. So MasterCheck actually provides an integrated program measure and a short-term meter, showing the dynamic content of the audio at playback. The third of the 5 primary applications of MasterCheck is to avoid downstream clipping introduced by compression codecs. Now, as spoke of before, these same consumer channels, whether it be iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, whatever it is, they employ compression codecs, whether that's MP3, AAC, OGG, etc., to reduce file size and bandwidth that is required. So unfortunately, however, these codecs do not handle high levels well, and that then introduces clipping into the signal. Now, intersample true peak monitoring can actually be used to reduce this. In fact, the true peak level as defined by most industry standards gives a more accurate representation of the levels in the signal than traditional sample peak metering. So mixing to a level of -1 dBTP or -3 dBTP for MP3 helps to avoid introducing downstream distortion when compression codecs are then employed. Now, it would be notable to mention that there are 2 different versions of this plugin, the MasterCheck and the MasterCheck Pro. Now, the MasterCheck Pro also provides codec monitoring and metering. This allows for real-time encoding and analysis of up to 5 codec streams simultaneously, simulating the real-world consumer listening experience and allowing limiting to be applied to produce an optimal master for today's digital delivery systems. Moving on now to the fourth of the 5 primary applications of MasterCheck, that is comparing your dynamics and loudness levels with reference material. I talk about this a lot on my channel and just how useful reference material being used in a mixer master is and how powerful that will be on down the road. Now, in addition to targeting recognized playout loudness levels, MasterCheck can also take a reference track as a source for comparison. Now, this can be a useful tool when comparing your work with respective material in the same genre, or even helping you to determine appropriate compression levels and characteristics of said mix or master. It is also possible to use MasterCheck in a mix to determine loudness differentials between different tracks and different groups. This technique can be used to maintain dialogue clarity during radio and podcast mixes, where a differential of dialogue level is desired. And lastly, the 5th and final of the primary applications of MasterCheck, and probably the most practical, is removing loudness from the signal chain. A difficulty in applying compression and limiting is that these techniques inevitably boost the loudness of the output. Louder audio sounds better. However, as a result, it can be very difficult to determine if the effect is actually making things sound better or if it's just that we prefer the sound when it's louder. So MasterCheck can actually be used to A/B your audio with and without effects, whilst simultaneously matching the loudness to allow you to make a truly objective assessment of the processing that you're then applying. Now remember, once you mix to a level louder than the playout system, any additional loudness that you achieve will be automatically turned down. So MasterCheck allows you to choose objectively what you do with this additional headroom without being misled by loudness mismatches. Okay, now let's take a look at the main interface of the plugin itself, and I'll explain what each one of the buttons and or the respective drop-down menus contain. Now, with the exception of the codec encoding, monitoring, and the metering section, both MasterCheck and MasterCheck Pro provide the same functionality via a slightly different layout. The MasterCheck Pro interface can be switched between the compact and the codec layouts using the mode control in the settings panel. So the first thing we're going to look at are the utility controls, and that can be found up here. This here is your preset browser. Now you can use the arrows within the preset browser to switch back and forth between the various presets that are contained within the plugin. You can also select the small box with the lines in it to open up the presets menu and select any of them from the list here as well. Likewise, if you'd like to rename any of the presets that are found here, you can always double click in this pane here and rename it whatever you might desire. The installed folder that comes with MasterCheck contains the factory presets. These cannot be overwritten. However, user presets can be saved in the user folder, and a star symbol will be shown against the preset name if the settings have changed from the original saved version. Presets and folders can then be organized by clicking these small three dots here, which is highlighted when the mouse pointer is placed over the folder or preset name. Folders can be deleted, renamed, and browsed using the same standard OS interface. Likewise, presets can additionally be moved or even copied. The small question mark to the right opens the About page with access to the credits, deauthorization options, and the product manual if installed. Working our way down through the plugin now, this section here, or the PSR section, is the peak to short-term loudness ratio meter, which gives you a real-time PSR reading for the audio during playback, as you can see on the screen before you. Now, located just beneath the PSR is the program loudness. This is measured according to the ITU-R-BS 1770 industry standard, and this is the integrated program loudness value since the last reset. It's generally used as the target value or loudness normalization. The target value, either as defined in the settings or derived from a reference track if active, is shown in the bottom left corner here. Okay, now we're going to work our way from the left to the right. So starting on the left, the meter that you see on the farthest left is the short-term loudness meter. This shows the loudness over a 3-second sliding window according to the same industry standard aforementioned, giving a real-time loudness value for the audio during playback. The numerical value at the top of the meter shows short-term loudness. You'll notice that there are two small white lines found on this meter as well. This is the program loudness indicator, and this overlay shows the integrated program loudness level. Located just to the right of the short-term loudness meter is the PSR meter. This shows the peak to short-term loudness, giving a real-time PSR for the audio during playback. Now, the numerical value that's found at the top of the meter shows the PLR, or the peak to loudness ratio, using the integrated program loudness value since the last reset. Located just below the PSR meter is the anchor button. This anchors the PSR meter to the top of the scale. This can be useful in making a reading against the scale. To the right of the anchor button is the MS button. This button can be used to switch the metering into mid-side mode. When mid-side is active, the bar meters will split to show the mid-side readings instead of left and right. When the mid-side is active, the main PSR and program loudness values are still derived from the complete stereo mix, only the bar meters switch to mid-side. The meter that's found on the right of the plugin is the true peak meter, and the small numbers that you see here at the top is the TP max, or the maximum true peak level. Another useful button that is found here at the bottom is the reset button. The reset is a master reset to reset all of the meter readings. Over here on the right, you'll see what looks like a small gear. This is the settings menu, and you can click this to open the settings panel for detailed meter configuration options. And moving up to the middle, we have a button that is called Offset to Match. The Offset to Match control is used to apply a loudness unit offset to the output in order to match the overall program loudness to the chosen target. Now, this is either the target defined on the options panel or by the preset, or the loudness of the external reference track if it is actually active. If offset to match is active, the level will be boosted or attenuated accordingly, and the amount of offset applied is shown on the interface. All meter readings will be also adjusted accordingly. The offset applied is a static value to avoid wandering as the reference or the program loudness adjusts. So if there is a significant drift from the target, click the refresh button to align with the targeted value. It is recommended that the offset to match control is used primarily as an orientation and auditioning facility. Where large offsets are generated, rather than using the offset output, a better approach would be to restructure the gain prior to the MasterCheck plugin to achieve the desired level. Now, if using this control to match audio with very different loudness levels, it is possible to generate a large positive correction value, which will then cause overload at the output. Now, to avoid that distortion downstream, it is recommended that an inner sample limiter is inserted to limit the level. Just below that, we have a button that is entitled External Ref, or External Reference. This control is used to activate an external reference audio source, or a sidechain input, and is not required during general operation. Now, it's notable to mention that the external reference is connected to the MasterCheck plugin using the NUGEN Audio Send plugin. If a Send plugin is active, click External Ref to use this as a reference audio source. Located just to the right of the external reference is a small icon here that is called the delta. If this option is active, the main program, PLR, and program loudness indicators will switch to delta or difference mode, showing the difference in PLR and program loudness between the audio reference and the current program material. The speaker control can also be used to direct the reference audio through the main output. Alright, now let's talk a little bit about codec monitoring. MasterCheck Pro provides a real-time audio codec metering and monitoring section. This is accessed through the expanded codec interface, which can be selected using the option in the settings panel if it is not already active. Let's take a look at the different set of controls that we have here for the encoding option that's found within MasterCheck Pro. The first set of controls we're going to look at is metering and monitoring. When meter is selected, MasterCheck Pro will meter selected codecs, but will continue to output the native DAW audio. For instance, the audio output will be at the native DAW NLE audio resolution and not the codec output. This mode allows for a full resolution mixdown to be produced while continuing to monitor multiple audio compression codecs for clipping. When monitor is selected, the audio output is that of the selected real-time codec stream. Now, this control should not be engaged when making an audio mixdown, as many audio compression codecs are highly lossy and can degrade the quality of the original native audio stream significantly. Located in the middle is the delta control. Using this control will allow you to hear the difference between the original audio and the compressed audio stream. Now, it's notable to mention that the delta control is not available when the AUG Vorbis codec is selected. Likewise, the delta can often be seemingly quite large. However, as codecs are generally optimized to hide the difference using psychoacoustic techniques, the A/B comparison before and after encoding may be far more acceptable than would initially appear from the first inspection when clicking the audio delta button. Located just below the metering and the monitoring buttons are the codec sections. These square checkboxes can be used to activate or deactivate each of the 5 codec slots individually. The radio buttons to the right are used to monitor the codec output on the main true peak meter. If at any time you would like to change the settings of the codec applied in each slot, you can simply click the name box to open the codec option panel for that slot. By opening one of these dialog boxes, you'll see the codec profile name, the codec to be employed, and the mode for which it was employed. You can either choose constant bitrate or variable bitrate. Likewise, you can change the bitrate itself and choose from a drop-down list. As VBR encoders choose a flexible bitrate dependent upon the audio in question, if VBR is chosen, the selectable bitrates are more approximate values. Also, CBR is not available for the AUG Vorbis codec. You'll also notice that just to the right of the codecs there is a small group of meters here. These meters allow you to see if there's any clipping being introduced into the codec, and if there is, the small circle here will turn from a bluish color to a red, showing that at one point in time there was clipping introduced into the signal. The small number here will tell you just how much clipping was introduced. Alright, now let's begin to take a look at the settings menu, which can be found yet again by clicking on the small gear icon that's found in the lower right hand corner. In addition to the number of presets for typical use, MasterCheck can also be customized to specific requirements using a number of options contained within this settings panel. You'll notice the various collars that you see here on the top portion of this panel. These are called collar splits. Collar splits can be used to define different zones within the bar meters to indicate desired targets, out of specification values, etc. The split values determine the position of the collar boundaries, so click and drag up and down to change the value, or double-click to enter a specific value. To change the collars of the sections, you can simply click the swatch to open the collar picker window, as shown here. If an external reference source is selected, there will also be a separate section here for that external reference source and collar splits that will be applicable to it as well. The small TP button determines the algorithm that's used to determine the true peak measurement. You can either choose from the Apple AF clip or the ITU industry standard. Likewise, you can set auto reset to on or off. This will reset the PLR, PSR, and the program loudness values automatically when playback is stopped and restarted. Just to the right of that, there is a ballistics menu. This sets the meter ballistics to recognized standards. The update rate and the time window is as defined in EBU R128. This parameter determines the decay time only and does not affect the maximum values. In the section just below that, you see the segments section. Segments determines the number of loudness units represented by each segment on the short-term loudness meter. You can also change the color of the text on the interface by clicking on the text color menu here. And to the right of that is the target. Now this determines the reference target used when using the offset to match feature, or in other words, it is the target loudness value being aimed for. Just below that, you have the units. You can choose between LKFS or LUFS. And lastly, you have the mode. The MasterCheck interface is available in 3 different modes: meter, compact, and codec. When MasterCheck is set to meter, it will be metering without codec encoding, metering and monitoring options. When MasterCheck is set to compact, it switches to a vertically reduced size suitable for display on smaller screens, such as laptops. For convenience, the interface will also auto-resize to compact mode if initially opened on a screen not capable of displaying the full-length interface. And lastly, for MasterCheck Pro users only, there is the codec option. This switches to the full interface, including codec encoding, metering, and monitoring. Alright, now let's begin to take a look at some practical applications of using the MasterCheck plugin in your mixes and or masters to actually provide some desirable results. Now, in the new world of loudness normalized playout, it is important to understand just exactly how your music is going to reach your consumer. If you don't take this into account, there's a good chance that it will not be as you originally intended. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to switch the units to LKFS, as this is going to be the standard that I'm going off of. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit this playback source.
He's got a golden guitar and $1 million sound. Everywhere that he goes, he's selling out shows, bringing people from all around.
Okay, so as you can see, I'm hitting that limiter pretty pretty hard. And if you'll notice here on the master bus, I have the adaptive limiter set before the NUGEN MasterCheck. There's a reason for this. You see, loudness normalization means that simply pushing all of your audio into the master limiter could in fact make your production seem quieter and flat compared with the competition. So in order to both audibly and visually experience this effect, we've placed a limiter on the master bus and we've made this a heavily compressed, traditionally loud mix. And then we've placed the master check just after the limiter on the master bus. Now we're already starting to see readings of loudness levels around -11 or even sometimes -12 LKFS. And this means that the limiter is working very hard. So now we're going to choose a random preset codec. In this instance, it's going to be YouTube, and we're going to click offset to match. Now, this is how our audio is actually going to be heard by the consumer, regardless of how we're hearing it now within the DAW. Let's take a listen.
He's got a golden guitar and $1 million sound. Everywhere that he goes, he's selling out shows, bringing people from all around, and he's got money.
So the two key points that we need to notice here is, first off, there is a significant drop in level at the playout, almost 6 dBs in most cases. And also the audio now peaks well below 0 dB FS. So in other words, mastering as hot as possible simply wastes headroom and creates dull mixes that never really get loud to begin with. So using MasterCheck, it is possible to mix to loudness normalization targets and produce dynamic masters that make full use of the available headroom that are not automatically turned down at playout. Because of this, MasterCheck then empowers you to mix with confidence and preserve your musical intention all the way throughout the transmission chain. Okay, now let's talk about using the MasterCheck plugin to mix and master to a specific target. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to place the MasterCheck plugin on the master bus, as we have done here. Now we're going to choose a preset and we're going to play some audio. From this preset, I'm going to use the YouTube, which the target is found here in the left-hand corner. It is -13 LKFS in order to get a good sounding mix and or master. Now, the preset will determine the target loudness for your audio, so different playout situations use slightly different targets. If you have a specific target that you would like to mix to, you can set it directly in the settings panel as well. So as the audio plays, MasterCheck will then measure the program loudness. This value is constantly updated and gives a reading for all the audio measured since the last reset. By default, MasterCheck will reset the meter every time playback is stopped and then restart it. The program loudness for a piece of music is the value acquired by playing the entire piece through the meter from start to finish. This can be thought of as the average loudness for the track and is the value used by the playout system to achieve a consistent average loudness from track to track. At any point, you can cause the offset to match button to automatically match the loudness for your audio to target. The loudness offset applied is indicated in the interface with these small bars here. As the program loudness changes, the adjusted volume may drift away from the target value. Click the circular refresh button to realign the target then, which is found here. So you'll notice that by setting the adaptive limiter to a lower, more conservative setting, I'm actually getting closer to my target values already. If you'd like to mix to avoid distortion due to downstream codec conversion, simply keep the true peak meter out of the red. Now, as stated before, most streaming services also use some form of data compression downstream, whether that be MP3, AAC, etc., which can then introduce distortion into the audio if the level is too high. True peak metering is a new form of standardized intersample metering defined in the industry standard ITU-R BS 1770 with a variation of the standard preferred by Apple known as AFClip, designed to accurately model the analog waveform to give an accurate indication of the audio levels. So to avoid codec conversion distortion, many loudness standards also specify a maximum true peak level, which is indicated on the true peak meter for that particular preset. So what is the key takeaway that we've learned from this first example? Simply ease off of the compressor. You see, loudness normalization rewards dynamic mixing. If you're used to the loudness wars, you may find that the only way to bring your audio in on target is to turn it down on the master bus, which means that the audio now peaks well below the maximum. Try experimenting with less compression to produce a more dynamic mix. To make the most of the available headroom without overcompressing, ideally your mix should arrive more or less at the target without the need to use the offset to match facility. Along these same lines, another practical application of using the MasterCheck is to measure the dynamics of your mix. MasterCheck introduces a new numerical measure of dynamic content or dynamic range within the audio, which is the peak to loudness ratio and the peak to short-term loudness ratio. MasterCheck also provides a PSR bar meter showing the dynamic content of the audio at playback and an integrated program measure, the PLR, shown at the top of the PSR bar meter. You can find those here. The PLR meter can be used to assess the dynamics of your audio and objectively compare with the reference tracks if you have any selected. However, a PLR range of 8 to 15 would be a reasonable rule of thumb for a healthy dynamic mix. MasterCheck can also be used in mid-side mode to examine the mid-side relationship of the PLR values when using mid-side compression techniques as well. Creating an open and dynamic mix can now lead the track to actually standing out from its competition. As it is no longer possible to be the loudest, other solutions to gain listener attention and interest must be explored and exploited. All right, now let's talk about using MasterCheck to compare reference material. So MasterCheck can also be used to compare your tracks to reference material in order to measure the differences in loudness, the PLR and the true peak readings. The first thing you have to do, though, is you have to place the send plugin on the reference track in question. So I have the send plugin located here, placed on the reference track here. When installing the MasterCheck plugin, you can actually tick a box to either install the send plugin as well, or also to just install MasterCheck itself. If you're going to utilize MasterCheck, however, to the fullest of its potential, I recommend that you also install the send plugin. This send plugin is used to tap into the audio at any point in the signal flow in your DAW and send the audio through to the MasterCheck plugin. To make a comparison between your audio and the reference track, you simply create an audio track with your reference audio and insert the send plugin in the track as you can see here. Now we're going to click on the button here that says external reference, and you'll notice that the connection has been made to MasterCheck here. So simply you just place MasterCheck as you usually would to monitor your mix and click the external reference button. If you're using more than one NUGEN audio send plugin in your mix or more than one reference, you may need to open up the settings panel and select the correct source from the drop-down menu. You can find that here. And at any time you can rename the send here. MasterCheck will now replace the target loudness volume in the bottom left with the loudness measurement from the reference track. The PSR of the reference track will also be shown in the PSR window. You can monitor the reference audio by clicking the speaker button here. You also have the option of clicking the delta button here, which will then show you the PSR and loudness difference. So this here will be your reference, this will be your track, and then this here will be the difference between the two if this is selected. You can also click the offset to match to hear your audio matched to the source. With all of the various options here, you can now use the meters to examine the differences in PSR, loudness, and the true peak readings and adjust compression or limiting to taste. Let's hear this in action now as I bring this fader up.
Well, that sunlight, midnight is coming after you. Always has before. I pray that you will make it back in time. Time to your soul lead.
Another very unique way to use MasterCheck in your mix and or master is to remove loudness from an effects chain. Now this can be a very useful technique to employ when you're trying to evaluate the effects of processing without being influenced by the feel-good factor of increased loudness. Now generally speaking, if you turn up some audio, it sounds better. Now, this can be problematic when attempting to make an objective assessment of any form of processing that affects the loudness, whether that be a compressor, a limiter, or even an EQ. Because the loudness increase alone will make things sound better, and therefore will trick your ears into thinking that whatever you're doing is helping. MasterCheck can be used to remove the loudness difference by matching loudness before and after effects. So the effect without loudness can be auditioned, hence making it much easier to assess the contribution of processing that is being involved. Now, the process by which we employ this tactic is very similar to comparing your audio to reference material as we just seen, except now we're comparing the same track before and after processing. The way that we'll do this is we will simply place the MasterCheck at the end of the plugin chain, which as you can see here, I have it at the end on my master bus, and now we'll place the send plugin at the start of the chain. And as you can see, I have it here just before the Gullfoss and the adaptive limiter. It's important, however, to check the audio through box on the send plugin located here to allow the audio to pass through the signal chain. By default, this is unchecked, so make a note of that. Now we can simply play audio and click the offset to match to remove the loudness differential.
He's got a golden guitar and $1 million sound. Everywhere that he goes, he's selling out shows, bringing people from all around. And he's got money, and that money's made him proud. He's had so much for so long, forgot what the blues is all about. But the crossroads are calling, time to pay your dues. Well, that sunlight, midnight is coming now.
So as you can see, we were able to hear the effect of the Gullfoss and the adaptive limiter without any increased volume to see if we were actually affecting the mix in a positive way. And clearly, as you could hear, the Gullfoss and the adaptive limiter together was a great combination to really clean up the mix and also bring in a little bit more tightness to the instrumentation. In this last example of a practical application for the MasterCheck within your mixer master, I'm going to be talking about dialogue clarity for podcast, audio for video, or post-production. MasterCheck has several applications beyond music production, particularly in the arena of dialogue intelligibility. With much of today's audio being delivered to mobile devices, the high dynamic range of a typical podcast or talk radio program may in fact be too wide for dialogue intelligibility. Now, this means that the consumer is constantly reaching for the volume control to boost quiet sections and then experiences discomfort in the louder sections when they come back in. In extreme cases, it may not even be possible to boost the level of the audio enough on the consumer playback device to make the dialogue even intelligible to begin with. As a rule of thumb, this can be avoided by keeping the PLR below 16. Now, another common source of consumer complaint is the lack of dialogue clarity due to the background music and effects being too loud. This simple mistake can occur due to the fact that many consumer playback systems are simply of too low of quality to replicate what sound perfectly clear in the post-production studio. Specifying a minimum rule of thumb for dialogue versus background loudness separation can assist in accidental errors of this kind. Hence, the MasterCheck plugin can be used to automatically monitor the relative loudness of a dialogue bus and make sure that there is always a loudness differential high enough to maintain dialogue clarity. I'm going to show you now how you would use this in a practical application in a dialogue type setting. So I've created sort of a commercial slot here for the Pro Mix Academy, and I've got music behind the dialogue. Now I want to get this music at a good standard to where it's going to sound good on a wide variety of sources, where you're not going to not hear the music and you're not going to have the music overpowering the dialogue. So I'm going to use MasterCheck in order to get that up to an industry standard, which, as we've already heard, is about -14 dBs. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and place the send plugin on the music bed. I'm going to place the MasterCheck on the master bus, which is where the dialogue is headed. So this is what it sounds like now. Today's video is sponsored in part by the Pro Mix Academy. The Pro Mix Academy offers affordable courses from men. Now, it doesn't sound bad, but as you can clearly hear, the dialogue is just way louder than the music, and the music would probably get lost, especially in a podcast setting. If someone's listening through their car, they wouldn't even hear the music except for maybe small pieces of it, and it would sound as if it was almost a mistake. So by using the offset to match feature and the external reference here, it's now going to bring those levels right where they need to be. So take a listen now. Today's video is sponsored in part by the Pro Mix Academy. The Pro Mix Academy offers affordable courses from mentors, world-class engineers, Grammy winners, and multi-platinum selling producers. And with the resources available on the Pro Mix Academy, you can learn how to create radio-ready mixes from the comfort of your own home studio. Most of the courses also offer multi-tracks that you can then add to your portfolio and begin to build out your business. Follow the link in the description of this video to head on over to the Pro Mix Academy today and start learning the skills that are needed to take your hobby or your business to the next level. Okay, so you can see that just by adjusting a few things there, using the master match, I was able to get that music underneath the dialogue perfectly where it needed to set, and that way it's not going to be overpowering the dialogue and vice versa. So as you can see, there's a wide variety of usage for the MasterCheck plugin, whether it be for references, whether it be for mixing and mastering for dynamic range, or whether it even be for editing a podcast or post-production. Now, if you'd like to check out this plugin for yourself and see if it's going to be something that you'd like to add to your workflow, head on over to the NUGEN Audio website, create an account, and from there, you can go into your user area and download a fully functional 15-day free trial of any of the plugins that they have on there. I hope you found this review of the NUGEN MasterCheck plugin useful. If you did, drop a comment in the comment section below and let me know how you would use this plugin in your particular workflow. Until next time, remember, we can dream alone, we can create alone, but together we can achieve so much more. Today's video is sponsored in part by the Pro Mix Academy. The Pro Mix Academy offers affordable courses from mentors, world-class engineers, Grammy winners, and multi-platinum selling producers. And with the resources available on the Pro Mix Academy, you can learn how to create radio-ready mixes from the comfort of your own home studio. Most of the courses also offer multi-tracks that you can then add to your portfolio and begin to build out your business. Follow the link in the description of this video to head on over to the Pro Mix Academy today and start learning the skills that are needed to take your hobby or your business to the next level.